Hello to you, Jeff.
Morning, Mike.
How
Sunny
is
day here in
how's your
beautiful
summer
British
going
Columbia.
over the past week? Are you getting out and enjoy the beautiful weather?
Actually, I went to the folk festival and I had a great time. Haven't been
Shocker
for a number
alert!
of years.
Shocker alert! Jeff Meigs goes to the folk
Yeah, no, it
festival.
was really great. It
Did
was
not
really
have
great.
that on my bingo card.
No, there were a lot of people my age there, but it was a great show.
Were there were there any BC conservatives at the folk festival that you noticed?
Not that I noticed, but I think that the folk festival had at least two near-death experiences, and I think they really took some hard lessons from that. So it was a much leaner show, fewer stages, but very good quality groups, including acts, more local acts, and not a beer garden. You could take beer anywhere, so really letting their hair down on that front. But it was a lovely, beautiful day, and the snowbirds flew overhead. Our
Oh yeah,
Canadian Air Force aerobatic team did many low passes right over us, I guess, on their way to the fireworks or something. I'm
yeah.
not
There
sure.
the fireworks night. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Well,
great.
I've actually been to the folk fest myself. It's a very well attended, important event in the community. I will say that for it.
Hmm.
Um, well, in a few moments, I'm going to introduce our guest who's waiting in the ambassadorial suite here at the Hotel Pacifico. But later on in the strategy suite, Jeff and I will be joined by labor vet, campaign vet, political staffer vet, and public affairs consultant, all in one, Anita Zaenker. And we're going to discuss sporting news, political shuffleboard, that is, in Victoria. GoFundMe changed quickly to We Funded on rare diseases. Premier Eby hangs out with the premiers. You might want to talk to the one premier who's fattened her heritage fund lately, we've heard. We'll look at the coming boom in defense procurement and whether BC will get a piece of the action. And finally, BCGU is taking a strike vote. Are we heading into a long, hot autumn? So lots to talk about in Strategy Suite. But first, we're pleased and honored to welcome Canada's ambassador to Japan and special envoy for the Indo-Pacific, Ian McKay. Ian is a Penticton native who's joining us from Penticton today, who, after studying at UBC in Queens, found his way to New York and Tokyo working in international financial markets. He turned to public service in the 2000s, serving as senior policy advisor during the Chrétien and Martin governments, and later serving as national director for the Liberal Party of Canada. He returned to BC to serve as CEO of the Vancouver Economic Commission from 2013 to 2018, and then was summoned again to Ottawa to help negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal with Japan. He served as CEO of Invest in Canada before being appointed Ambassador of Canada to Japan in April 2021. In addition to those responsibilities, he was named as Canada's Special Envoy for the Indo-Pacific in April 2023. I always feel so humbled when I introduce our guests because they have so many qualifications. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Ian.
Hey, Mike, it's great to see you. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for doing this. And you grew up in Penticton. You're in Penticton today. I heard a rumor that you were actually a pretty good basketball player back in your day.
There were a number of McKays from the region, including some of my own family, who were pretty good. I benefited from their legacy, so people thought I was good. I was the sixth man in our local Penn High Lakers team.
All right.
Um, but I really enjoyed playing ball. We had some pretty good teams.
Now, did I already screw it up? Are you a McKay, not a McKay?
No, I'm a McKay for
You're a
sure.
McKay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
There was
McKay.
some dispute over sheep over a fence in Scotland long ago that divided the Mackays and the McKays. I don't
Well,
quite understand it.
we'll dispense with the McKays and go with the McKays here.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'm interested, like early in your career, you found your way to Tokyo. What drew you there originally back in, was it the 90s?
Um, it was before then. In fact,
Okay.
I'm almost frightened to recollect, Mike, that 45 years ago this month, the city of Penticton, which has a sister city in northern Japan, sent me as an exchange student for a
Oh,
sister city exchange program. I was in grade 11. And over the course of the summer, I traveled to a little town called Ikeda in
wow.
Hokkaido in Japan. And it sort of started my quest with regard to Japan. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, that started 45 years ago. I went back a year later to do a full year of Japanese studies on a Rotary Club scholarship program. And then I had engaged with Japan for many years after, including my financial markets career.
Well, those rotary exchanges have left quite a mark actually on a lot of people across
I'm a big
Canada.
fan, big advocate, and I evangelize about sister city Rotary Club exchange student programs all the time.
What is it about Japan that excites you and gets your wheels turning?
So it's interesting. I try to recall what it was when I was 16 that made me want to go back and go back and go back. Um, you know, I'm curious about frankly, about their curiosity. I remember going there as a student and how many questions they had for me about Canada that I had no idea what the answer was about our economic sort of makeup, our cultural makeup, our relations with the US. So the first thing that struck me was how curious they were about our country. And as a kid, how little I knew about it. So it sort of changed my focus to learn a lot more about Canada. But the other thing is just the civil social order that they have. You know, it's a very homogenous population, 124 million people in a country that's about the third the size of British Columbia, and how everything seems to work without a whole lot of chaos. There's kind of a social contract that people have with each other to get along. In some, in some trying circumstances of congestion and whatnot. But it's also the food, frankly, the language, the culture. It is just a fascinating place. And Tokyo, where I live now, is a function of all those things. It's a big, dynamic, safe, clean city that has probably the best food in the world, fashion, architecture, but then all sorts of history as well. So I'm a big fan. I always have been a big fan. And I'm just, frankly, not just pleased and delighted, but honored to serve in the role that I do in a place that I know well and that I really have a lot of fondness for.
It's interesting because you mentioned the sister city thing, and Vancouver's a sister city with Yokohama. I was on city council and became aware of that, and it made perfect sense because Yokohama was the end of the trade route that was established by the CPR and the CPR ships, the Empress ships, and everything else. But our relationship in BC has been strained by some of the disasters of war and racism, and yet the relationship persists and continues to get stronger. It's a subtext really of BC history in so many ways.
It sure is. I mean, from a trade perspective, BC does about 25 or 30% of Canada's exports to Japan. That goes back a long, long way. But Japanese fishermen started to migrate to Western Canada, British Columbia, Steveston, Richmond, in the 19th century. And some of them stayed and built communities. We know about the strong Japanese community in Steveston. We know about Japantown that existed in Powell Street back in the early part of the 20th century. And we know of the devastating effects of the Canadian government's policy in 1941 to move those people out of the coast, even those who were born and bred in Vancouver. There's a terrific film that came out, I think in 2015, called The Asahi. And it was a Japanese produced film that debuted at the Vancouver Film Fest. But it was about the baseball team of Japanese Canadians in Japantown down by Powell Street, who weren't allowed to play against the white kids teams until everybody realized that they were really, really good. And when they were invited to play, of course, they beat the white kids team pretty handily. So great film and great legacy there for that history.
I think arguably the Powell Street community never recovered from those expulsions in many ways. But,
one of the great public servants in Canadian history came out of that time, Tom Shoyama,
Indeed,
who went on to serve with great distinction. Well, one of the things that occurs to me sometimes when we think about Japan, it's such an important trading relationship for BC and Canada. And sometimes I think we don't think about it enough, and I wonder whether it's because we just don't have a very large Japanese diaspora population in BC and Canada compared to the Chinese and South Asian and Korean now, and some others. Like there's not a lot of immigration coming in from Japan. Um, you don't see them showing up in political nomination meetings in great numbers or, targeted by political parties as a group. Do you think that's part of it? Does that kind of put a different angle on our relationship?
Yeah, I think the diaspora that we had 100 and something years ago, had it grown and evolved to what it might have been, could have made a huge difference in the fabric of Vancouver, British Columbia, and even the trade relationship. Having said that, our trade relationship is solid and reliable and growing. It's about $40 billion two ways. It's more or less even. Sometimes and often the numbers are determined by currency fluctuations. But we're exporting obviously minerals, lumber, agriculture, and increasingly energy to Japan. So there is some scope for increase there. Japan's appetite for our food, agri-food, seafood products is enormous. Their appetite for our energy and our minerals is increasingly strong and robust. And so it's a matter of all the discussion that's going on now about trade corridor infrastructure and rails and ports and whatnot, providing a little more bandwidth to get more products out there. Having said that, we're at about 2% of our exports go to Japan. So marginal increase will happen. It's not going to be a game changer. But we have
2% for Canada.
Yeah.
But much higher for BC though.
For British Columbia, it's higher. Absolutely.
Yeah, about 10 or 11 or something.
Yeah, I think it's 10.5%. Yeah.
Yeah. And you referenced that energy exports. I mean, we've just seen the first first few shipments of LNG going from LNG Canada. What's the appetite for LNG in Japan? What's their energy situation there in terms of energy dependency? I know there's probably geopolitical issues vis-a-vis Russia and other things that are hard for us to comprehend here.
So the LNG Canada project, which was launched in 2018, Japan is a 15% shareholder through Mitsubishi. If they knew then what they know now about Russia and the Middle East and even the US, they would have taken probably 50% of that project. But they're happy with the 15%, and they will take more offtake from some of the other partners, I think. They're very hungry, thirsty for our energy. And LNG Canada, as you know, is the cleanest, lowest emission LNG on the planet. It's the biggest LNG project on the planet. So they are very, very happy that we delivered that project on time, even though it was through a COVID period. They're super excited about the propane that we export from Alberta to Japan. They're super excited about the TMX. TMX expansion. Japan is just very, very happy that Canada is delivering what Japan asked it to in terms of energy export and infrastructure. And I think their appetite for us as a very reliable partner is going to increase. So we have cedar and wood fiber and whatnot coming online. So they'll probably do some offtake from those as well.
But Ian, can you sketch for our viewers and listeners how Japan uses it? Because this was a revelation to me when I had the opportunity to travel there with John Horgan. I mean, propane and these fuels are used right in homes, as I understood it. That they don't have a gas pipe right to their house or necessarily enough hydro to do it. So many thousands or millions of people are cooking with propane every day.
Yep. And we only started exporting propane like 5 years ago. And now we're the #1 supplier, about 28% of the market share there. And it's used in residential homes. And it's used in industrial transportation vehicles. And what both our LNG and our propane is doing is it's allowing Japan to wean off some other unreliable partners or partners from whom the trade routes are complicated, whether it's the Gulf Coast, which is problematic, the Middle East, which is problematic, and of course, Russia. They previously got a lot of oil and gas from Russia, and we're hoping to replace that entire volume from Canada. And so
Well,
the
people,
8 days from Prince Rupert to ports in Yokohama and Tokyo is an unbelievable competitive advantage.
yeah, and I think the other thing that was a wake-up call to me was that they were, at least at that point, I don't know if it's still the case, but deciding, it seemed, to go to hydrogen as a clean fuel for transportation when we were going to electricity. So they have the tremendous capacity to produce automobiles, which everybody knows about, but we're thinking that they would actually use LNG to produce hydrogen to clean the emissions up from the transportation sector.
Yeah. And the next phase of their interest in, Canada vis-a-vis energy is hydrogen and ammonia projects,
Hmm.
primarily out of Alberta, but it would have to be railed again out to the West Coast. Um, those are big, complicated, expensive projects that carry with it some risk when you're transporting hydrogen ammonia. But the government of Japan has put in, I think, $3 billion in the window to help their proponents offset the cost of building these hydrogen infrastructure projects in Canada. So there's a couple of joint ventures that are going on that will require some help from Ottawa and some of the transportation companies, but we're hopeful that will materialize sooner than later.
Well,
We heard
you've
go
go
ahead,
ahead, Mike.
Geoff.
Oh, I was just going to say, Ian, you've worked at both ends of this conversation. You're in Japan and Asia now, but you were here with the Vancouver Economic Development Commission. And another sort of eye-opener for me was that the opportunities were vast in Japan, and the difficulties that you see in the relationships geopolitically with China and some of these other trading partners weren't there. It's big, big democracy, very well-established economy, familiar partners, all that kind of stuff. And yet a difficulty on the BC end, at least in terms of developing economic relationships overseas. Is there, now that you've seen it both ways, is there more we could do at this end to strengthen our ability to sell into those markets and get investment from them and things that we want to work on?
I mean, the investment is coming fast and furious from Japan into the mining sector, into the EV battery supply chain sector, of course. They just want, like, they consider us a very reliable, predictable partner, which is not what you'd think if you read the business media in central Canada. But they do. They trust us, they rely us, they understand our system. But yeah, they would like more robust trans-Canada transportation infrastructure and port infrastructure, and I think we're doing a lot of that. But their appetite to invest in EVs, batteries, mining, other energy sectors is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is, Japan's vulnerable in terms of food security. They're vulnerable because they only produce about 35% of the calories they consume, which is why they're very keen on our food, agri-food exports, plus canola and whatnot. Energy, they're vulnerable because they're more reliant on energy imports than any other G20 country, I think. And security-wise, they're vulnerable because they're in a hot zone. They're right across the way from North Korea, who's launched 100 missiles at Japan since I've been there, purposely missing, of course, but keeping everybody on guard. And, China's demonstrations of strength through the Taiwan Strait and whatnot is very concerning to Japan. And I think another best kept secret in Canada is in Canada is that we're doing more from a defense security cooperation perspective with Japan than we've ever done. And we're doing probably more than any country that's not called the United States. So that's a marked increase in our presence through our Navy, frigates, Air Force, Special Forces operations, cyber cooperation. We're a very reliable and welcome partner in helping Japan with their security concerns in the region.
Guests, the last few weeks we've been talking about removing barriers to interprovincial trade and how this can support stronger competition amongst telecom companies, which is good for consumers and a win for affordability. But, as I mentioned, big telecom companies including Cogeco and Bell are fighting to reduce competition and threatening to withdraw investment. They're lobbying the federal cabinet to overturn a decision by the CRTC that forces carriers to share access to their high-speed internet networks. Oh, and sharing is happening here in the West. They just don't want to do it in Ontario and Quebec. Bell doesn't want to share its fiber network out east so much that they are threatening to redirect capital away from Canada if wholesale access is mandated. And while they charge competitors a CRTC mandated rate of $73 per month per subscriber for wholesale access in Canada, effectively pricing out the competition, in the US, they're investing $5 billion in a company that actively promotes competitive wholesale rates. And while Bell is lobbying federal cabinet to overturn the CRTC's decision, I think the government knows how to follow the money. And the money shows that Bell's resistance to sharing fiber networks isn't about economic viability. It's about minimizing competition, plain and simple. And Canadians deserve better.
We heard last week from Kim Hackstad, President and CEO of Council of Forest Industries, about the dire strait of the forest sector, especially on the coast here, but also in the interior. What's the outlook for Japan as a market for BC wood going forward?
So first of all, Japan loves BC wood products. They love Kofi, Canada Wood. They love all the companies because British Columbia's worked very, very hard over 50 years more to develop really strong relationships with the buyers. Every year, BC sends a significant delegation with Kofi and Canada Wood and all the CEOs. So again, Japan considers this a very reliable partner for high quality products. The challenge there is that the domestic market in Japan is not growing. They're losing, on a population base of 124 million people, they're losing about 800,000 people a year through demographics and
Aging
through the
population,
absence, and through the absence of a meaningful sort of immigration framework. And so rural Japan, there are a lot of towns that are sadly sort of dying and being uninhabited. And so the cyclical nature of lumber exports to Japan has more challenging downturns than it has upturns in recent years.
Interesting. Well, tell us about your job. I mean, that's a pretty cool job, being ambassador to a G7 country. What does the job entail? What's on your priority list when you go to work in the morning?
Yeah, so it's a very dynamic relationship. I guess I'm in charge of managing the relationship with the political, commercial, defense, people-to-people exchange, consular relationship. No day is the same. I think when I first got there, my primary objective was to build really strong relationships with the political actors in Japan, with the senior officials in government, and with corporate Japan, with the CEO class of the trading companies, the car companies. And, I'll say with some humility that it's easier to do that when you speak Japanese, right? And there aren't many of my peers from around the world who are representing their countries in Japan who do. So I've kind of got a competitive advantage. And, we have really strong relationships at the political level, corporate level, education level with universities. So no day is different. There have been very few irritants, and there have been a lot of good files to work on, particularly on the commercial side to attract investment and increase trade. So it's a dynamic job. I'm busy all the time, and I've taken a week to come back to Penticton to get away for a little bit, but I'll be back on Friday and right back at her.
One of the things that I think British Columbians miss is where Japan and Japanese interests are in the economy. And just the other day, Cermaq announced that's a big fish farming operation, very, very big globally, ultimately owned by Mitsubishi, as I recall, has now acquired the interests of a Norwegian company, which has been frustrated by federal policy on this area, or that's what they're saying. Mitsubishi is also used to be in the coal business. I don't know if they still are, but they're certainly in the LNG business. Are there other areas where we see huge corporations like that playing a role in our economy?
There's a little more interest in agriculture. They're looking at the intersection of AI and agriculture to increase yields from Canadian agriculture producers. They're very interested in that. But again, the battery supply chain has been the one where they've been most active recently.
Does this go back to Ballard Power and our work on fuel cells and stuff? Or that's a different technology?
Yeah, it's
that's
different.
hydrogen, not
Yeah,
not
that's
batteries,
hydrogen. And they, Toyota specifically had a very strong hydrogen play domestically. So it wasn't so much a Ballard connection, but the new EV battery supply chain from the mines to the construction of the batteries to the OEM manufacturing to the recycling of the batteries is space that they're very, very keen on. Honda announced a year ago a $15 billion EV battery supply chain plant in Ontario. Now it's being paused a little bit because the appetite for EVs in the United States has declined somewhat because of political considerations. But they're there for the long haul. They know that this will change, so they'll be ready to kickstart it again soon. Asahi Kasei is another massive company in Japan that's doing a $2 billion separator plant, which is part of the battery. So yeah, minerals, LNG, EVs, batteries, all that sort of stuff. Clean energy. They've got a keen focus on Canada.
Well, as Canada turns its attention to other markets, some of which we already are in, like this one, and then you're an envoy now to Asia more widely. Is there more we need to do in terms of trade agreements, or is it just a matter of encouraging people on both sides of the line to get going and make investments? I mean, are we finished with the era of trans-Pacific trade agreements and that kind of thing, or are they going to be a feature as we try to diversify our trade partners?
Yeah, no, it's a terrific and timely question, Geoff, because I'm watching the narrative in Canada at the political level and at the media level and the business leadership level about diversify. One, two, three, diversify. And I get it. But Canada, through successive governments since the 80s, has been building the most formidable free trade framework in the world, right? We've got 15 or 16 free trade deals with over 50 countries, 1.6 billion consumers that every Canadian company has market access to. So I would really love the narrative to stop sort of yelling at the government to do more to diversify and start whispering quietly to corporate Canada and even some of the SMEs to take advantage of these deals. Because we are positioned better than any other country, literally, because we have market access to over 50 countries.
Well, I think that's one of the things that certainly concerns me as I see events unfold here. To take the softwood lumber example, we talked about this briefly last week. Corporate interests in the forest sector naturally diversified by hedging and investing in the United States when they were confronted with these tariffs that are so unreasonable and are probably going to continue in some fashion. So it's a decision that needs to be made at the corporate level, and they're making those decisions to sort of get out of the way of difficulties in the United States. It would be good if they went to places, in Asia where we could foster or develop existing relationships more strongly. But that debate doesn't really happen. I think you're one of those special envoys whose activities may be very important, but really underestimated here in the domestic market.
Yeah. So a couple of points. The Indo-Pacific role that I play it's become quite important, and it's another full-time job. The Indo-Pacific.
What's the definition of that Indo-Pacific region? What's included in that?
It started with the late former Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe, conceptualized a free and open Indo-Pacific. He wanted to broaden the scope and scale of what we used to call the Asia-Pacific right out to the Indian Ocean, to bring another major dynamic economic and political force, India, into the region to sort of dilute the dominance of China, quite frankly. So the Indo-Pacific region, as we define it, is actually 40 countries, but 18 of those are Pacific Islands. So the little tiny islands like Papua New Guinea and Solomon and Cook Islands and Tonga and Tuvalu and all those. But the Indo-Pacific region is our second largest export market at about $75 billion, or 10 or 11% of Canada's exports. So way below the US, but it's an important market for us. The positive news is that Since Canada launched the Indo-Pacific strategy in November of 22, we've had 9 significant trade missions led by the federal government to, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia, Australia. And the really terrific thing about those missions are that we had, in some cases, 300 Canadian companies going. And to your earlier point of diaspora vis-a-vis Japan, a lot of these smaller companies, whether they're in clean energy or ag or even technology, their leadership is often from the Indo-Pacific region. And so they feel very comfortable traveling and going and exploring opportunities in that part of the world. So I'm very, very positive that those trade missions will build short, medium, and long-term results, and that there is a certain subsection of Canadian entrepreneurs, business people, who understand the opportunity and have no hesitation going and building relationships in such a varied part of the world. They have some familiarity with it.
One thing that confused me, a recent sort of defense development, was the agreement between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom on nuclear submarines, and we were left out. So were we angry about that? Were we hurt? Were we feeling kind of, like wallflowers? And my own view is I'm not sure we want or could get into nuclear submarines anyway. But how do we compare to Australia in that conversation? Both, many parallels between Australia and Canada, except they're located in the Indo-Pacific. So how does that play out?
We often compare and sort of have competitive narratives between us and Australia about how we're doing. On the AUKUS front, you're absolutely correct. It was never going to be Canada's intention to build nuclear subs, so that was a non-starter for us. We have since become Track 2.0 dialogue partners with AUKUS, but frankly, the mainframe agreement is sort of going sideways in recent weeks and months. So not much to lament about there. I think our major advantage compared to the United States, for example, in the region, is the CPTPP. It's a legally binding market access trade framework that Australia is in as well. But it's not a talk fest, it's a get business done fest. And we've since added free trade with Indonesia and hopefully soon with the ASEAN bloc. So AUKUS was not a missed opportunity for us. CPTPP is a huge advantage. And we'll continue to work as an ASEAN dialogue partner, which is an important architecture for us to be a part of.
You mentioned the importance of trade missions to the Indo-Pacific, and Premier Eby was recently over with a delegation, I'm sure, darkening your door in Tokyo, I'm sure. My question is, how important are trade missions? When it comes down to, I know, all the premiers do them, all the prime minister and the ministers do them, but what is the most important thing to accomplish on those trade missions when they go? Because sometimes I just feel like it vaporizes once they're back home.
It's a terrific question. I might sound biased, but I have a huge positive view on trade missions. Historical perspective, we all remember Mr. Chrétien in the 90s, who would do trade missions to China and India and even Japan.
Team Canada.
But he would bring all the premiers.
Mm-hmm.
And, I love Mr. Chrétien dearly, but frankly, if you were a company on those trade missions, you were always having to navigate your way around the political protocol spotlight with those huge political delegations. We've done them in the past few years with the trade minister, Minister Ng, who has since left the political scene. But the point is that there wasn't a lot of navigating for the companies to do. They were the spotlight. They were the spotlight of the tour. Premier Eby has been over twice. He's had terrific delegations with him, including Indigenous leadership. And I think that is super important, that the companies, the investors, the partners in Japan are having direct dialogue with the Indigenous leadership who come on these missions. they're not hearing the view of First Nations people through any political filter. They're hearing it directly from them. I think that's been a huge step forward in clearing up misunderstandings and gaining clarity.
Does it make a difference on the First Nations piece whether it's a rights holder versus someone who's representing a more broader group like the FN or something like that?
Well, they're all important. So they all
Yeah.
provide more clarity and more transparency to our Japanese investors,
Right.
trading partners, government officials. And they do a terrific job of putting forward their case. And yeah, Premier Eby's had two great missions. Obviously meets with Mitsubishi regularly because of the significance of the LNG Canada project. But they're important because they tell our partners in Japan that we consider them to be highly valued and important partners. But equally, if not more importantly, the companies that come are given some sense of comfort that it's doable. They have access to customers, to investors, to partners who are quite keen to work with them. So I think the experience that the companies have when they go is substantive and is significant, and they all come back with a political delegation or not. So I'm a big fan.
Should we arguably be doing more of it? Or are we doing it at the right cadence right now in terms of
I mean,
how?
I would leave the follow-up to the companies who come, but for a premier to come, I mean, once a year, once or every 2 years is good.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that I've had Premier Houston from Nova Scotia, Premier Fury when he was Premier Newfoundland. Premier Smith was just over in April for a terrific trip. Ministers from Saskatchewan, Ontario, premiers from the north. It's been terrific. The cadence has been good.
We must be a busy guy entertaining.
It's a bit nonstop, but it's substantive. Like their schedules when they come are punishing schedules. But there's no wasted minutes and there's no wasted meetings. And I think they see the value in them as well.
Sounds good. Well, Ambassador, I know you're a busy guy. We appreciate you dropping by Hotel Pacifico to share this kind of global perspective that sometimes we're parochial British Columbia, we can't see over the Rocky Mountains or across the Pacific enough sometimes, but it's great for you to broaden our horizons today.
No,
Thanks
I really appreciate the opportunity, Mike and Geoff, and it's great to see you guys and call anytime. I'm heading back tomorrow, so I'll be right back in the thick of it. And, don't underestimate BC's opportunities and impact. We are, of course, the biggest trading partner with Japan in the region within Canada. So we just got to keep on keeping on.
All right.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Be
Great
good,
to see you.
folks. Thank you. Take care.
Pop quiz from our sponsor this week, listeners. What is a deep energy retrofit? Well, it's more than just a renovation. A deep energy retrofit is a comprehensive upgrade to an existing building that significantly improves its energy performance. We're talking better insulation, tighter air sealing, and high-efficiency mechanical systems, all working together to cut energy use and emissions. Why does it matter? Because buildings are responsible for over 10% of BC's greenhouse gas emissions. Earlier this spring, FortisBC hit a big milestone, the completion of deep energy retrofit upgrades at Manor House, a 50-unit affordable rental building in North Vancouver, originally built in 1972. This project is part of a $50 million pilot program to find the best ways to cut energy use in older homes and multifamily buildings across BC, key to meeting BC's climate goals. The target? A 50% or greater reduction in whole building energy use. That means lower energy bills for building owners and keeping rent low for tenants. For buildings like Manor House, it also means helping keep rents affordable and ensuring residents live in a safe, healthy home that's built to last another 50 years or more. Hey FortisBC, how do I go about getting a deep energy retrofit at Hotel Pacifico? I mean, there's a lot of hot air. Anyways, FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. Well, welcome to the hotel, Anita Zaenker, veteran of the union movement of BC. I'm going to put all your titles out again. campaign advisor, former chief of staff to Mayor Kennedy Stewart, now enjoying life as a public affairs consultant. Did I get everything?
It's a couple of things missing, but it's been a great life. Lovely to be here in the hotel in the summertime. Thanks for having me on.
What's this I hear about you also being a Rotary exchange student?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was so happy
This
to
is,
hear the ambassador talk about his experience. And I also was lucky to be a Rotary Exchange student. I was a Vancouver high school kid in the late 80s and graduated in 91 and was lucky to go on a Rotary Exchange to Gothenburg, Sweden, to the west coast of Sweden. So lived with a host family there. And it was a great life experience, changed my life. I loved Sweden so much. I still love Sweden very much, and kind of learned a lot about how a different society functions. Noticed some key differences between what I had experienced in British Columbia, including things like school lunch programs that blew my mind. Women in high positions in the workforce. That my host mother was a city manager of a small municipality.
Hmm.
Childcare, all those things. So I came back to British Columbia kind of with a desire to import and commit myself a little bit to some of these things that I experienced in Sweden, and I've maintained my connection to Sweden and Swedish over the years. Love to go back there as often as I can.
There you go.
I was briefly in Sweden and I was struck by how incredibly tidy everything was. That was unbelievable.
Yeah, countries change. It was great to hear the ambassador talk about Japan as an orderly society, and I think that's one thing we're experiencing in British Columbia is, can we get to a different sense of orderliness? What does that take? How much of that is rooted in your culture? How much of that is led through governments? All those questions, but lots to learn from what the ambassador was talking about. I really enjoyed
Mhm.
that.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Well, in your CV, I noticed I was kind of looking at your bio that you worked directly with George Haymon and Daryl Walker at BCGU. What did you learn from those labor veterans there with and their storied pasts?
Yeah, great question. I learned a lot. George Haymon hired me into the BCGU. That's where I got my first big union job, and I served him as executive assistant. I worked for President Daryl Walker as well. What did I learn from them? Well, the BCGU is a great and large union that really reflects British Columbia. And so I learned a passion for British Columbia. I learned a passion for public services in British Columbia from both of them in different ways. Um, they were different leaders. I remember you had Don Wright on the podcast a while back, and he talked about the styles of premiers. You have a CEO style of premier and a chair of the board style of premier. I think George Haymon was more of a CEO president of the union, and Daryl Walker was more of a chair of the board president of the union. But they both knew that public services mattered to British Columbia, and so they focused their union work around strengthening public services. And so I learned the passion from them and some of the skill. George Haymon, in particular, he always knew how to find a deal. He always knew where the deal was and worked towards it. He was always thinking several steps ahead. So I learned that strategic sense as well.
Well, we probably should move that topic up the list here. We're the BCGU strike vote. Um, is it heading to a confrontation? Is it going to be a long, hot autumn? What do you think, Jeff?
Um, I, I think it's a very unique round of bargaining for a bunch of reasons. One is that the last agreement, which I was still working in Victoria then, was arguably rich. It had a lot of increases for the GU members. It was a 4-year deal, which expired on March 31st. This time, I think uniquely, the one thing the two parties have agreed on is that it'll be a 2-year agreement, which has huge political ramifications. A 2-year agreement is short. And the context has changed that these provinces' finances have really deteriorated. And it's not really clear what either side is tilting for, in my opinion. I'd be interested in Anita's comments on this, but I'll just say this, like usually the employer will table a proposal, which the government has in this case, after offending the union quite badly by having a long conversation with all of the union members online, which was a new departure. They got over that hump, and the deal is about 1.5% in each year with some wrinkles for lower paid employees. So about 3% over 2 years, which is not particularly big, but it's the first offer, and the union has countered with an offer that has not been made public, and it hasn't leaked out, which is also odd. But I was reading in the paper that it's apparently about twice as high as the government offer. But the union is saying that it wants to modernize the contract, it wants to protect against affordability, and it wants to reduce the number of managers, which they consider a wasteful number. Those are all, standard fare in some respects, but also they're not prioritized. It's not clear where a deal would emerge. They're precisely what they mean. And on the employer side, it's not quite clear either. Usually the mandate is stated as we're prepared to do, for example, we're not going to fire anybody. We're not going to demand any concessions, but we will be laying people off if we can't afford them, and we're going to keep you to the rate of inflation or something like that. But that's not. I haven't really heard that clarity from the government side either. So a strike vote with, in my view, a rather big gap and a vague sense of where this might go is dangerous territory for the government. And there was a strike last time. It was just for the liquor distribution branch, but it was real. And the members will support the union. I'm 100% sure of that with quite a large strike vote. So anyway, Anita, what would you say in the face of all these realities?
Yeah, again, Jeff, I agree with so much of what you've said, not just right now, but in your previous pods. A strike vote is a step on the road to an agreement, and it's a show of strength and solidarity that a union bargaining committee will need so that it can go with confidence, back to the table. And have a line that they know that is drawn. But it's going to be very challenging to find a monetary agreement, I think, in this round of bargaining. The key, I would say, is being able to address some of those non-monetary issues that have been around for several rounds, and this would be the round to clean them up, and to be able to show that some success was made. Both parties want to come out of this saying, we achieved a collective agreement that serves the members who work in the public sector, that protects the services that they deliver. And let's also not forget that this is just one of the public sector bargaining tables. There are others, and so interplay
very
between
important point.
the BCGU table and the other sectoral tables also has to be very carefully managed on the labor side.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are heading to a long hot autumn because I think the government's fiscal situation is probably getting worse. Well, they haven't funded the carbon tax elimination, so that's on top of the deficit that was already there in forecasted in February. And Jock Finlayson and Ken Peacock, who are both now used to be at BC Business Council, now at ICBA, put out a statement earlier this week that they think the deficit might be as high as 16 to 18 billion. And the proof will be in the pudding on the quarterly report in September. So I wonder if the BCGU deal is not done by the quarterly report, if it is a bad fiscal outlook, like worse than people are expecting, it's going to put pressure on government to really hold the line on spending. So we'll see. We'll see. But I think the hourglass is working against the union, quite frankly, in getting what they want, given the government's fiscal situation.
Well, you look closer at some of the statements, and I watched the union president is Paul Finch, who's now he was the secretary treasurer, and he's now risen to president. This is his first full round as president. But he focused a lot on contract modernization, by which I took him to say he wanted to clean up, I think this is Anita's term, but the job evaluation process, which is a huge mediation arbitration machine that's within the collective agreement that fixes anomalies in the pay system. So if a certain group of workers say, we're not fairly treated compared to this other group, a big process unfolds, their jobs are evaluated, a decision is made, and that all leads to an increase. It never leads to a decrease for anybody. That process is ponderous, and the union's looking to roll that in. There may be an opportunity for the government to simplify that, provide some financial relief in certain quarters, and provide a monetary solution that's not really in the final wage increase. But I'm not sure. I think it's complicated and difficult for the government. And in my own experience, even though the strike only involved the liquor distribution branch, was that you really can't think about very much else. It's a big,
When
big
there's a
story
strike, yeah.
in the media. Yeah, like it doesn't,
Wow.
if even if it's just liquor distribution branch, and that's not casting shade on liquor distribution workers, it has an impact. It's in the news. There's a lot of discussion, and you're getting ready for FIFA, the $658 million or whatever. Anyway, I could go on for a long time. I'll stop there.
Okay, well let's move on to the sports and the political shuffleboard that happened last week with the cabinet shuffle, which caught me by surprise a bit. We didn't have it on our radar when we recorded the pod last week, that's for sure. And that's why I'm still exhausted, Jeff, from our emergency podcast on the.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Opinions are us.
cat-like reflexes. But
Seize the moment. And now you can unpack it a little bit more.
yeah, now we can let our hair down, so to speak. But Anita, my question for you, to quote Bruce Cockburn, if a shuffle happens in the summer, does anybody hear?
Bruce Cockburn, have you been at the Vancouver Folk Music Festival?
Actually, I saw him at the Stein Valley Festival. That's
Oh,
really dating myself.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
this is does it? Yes. Whether or not people heard it, knew it, felt it, I think it's a good move. I think it resets, it recalibrates the cabinet. When and all the things that the premier said when he announced the shuffle, when he set his cabinet after being elected, the world was quite different. Not only have we experienced everything that we have with our relationship with the U.S., but we have a new federal government. And I think one of the more interesting moves in this cabinet shuffle is this. The parliamentary secretary for AI and new technologies. And that's kind of a replication of Prime Minister Carney's appointment of Evan Solomon into that role. So that's, I think, a very good harmonization or modernization of a function within that cabinet for Rick Glumac, who will bring a lot of strength to that role. Where I would say, just looking at the changes that were made, there's a lot of focus on the economic growth, right? And the modern technologies. The Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills still remains the Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills, albeit with a new minister. And Innovation BC is now going under the Minister of Finance, I understand, not in the Jobs and Economic Growth Ministry. So there are pieces of this kind of modernization of the economy, economic growth, skills, and
Probably because
development.
Brenda Bailey wanted it, I guess, because
Well,
she's
and
got the
that's
tech
good.
background. Yeah.
Exactly. The question is, how will they be coordinated? How will government lead some of that transition of skill development, business development to adapt to the new technologies in a way that's kind of coherent and responsive, and people know how they're engaging with government as we navigate these interesting times, both for the labor side as well as the business side of these questions. So.
But big picture, Jeff, what do you think the government was trying to get out of the shuffle at the end of the day?
That's what I was confused about, and I remain a bit confused about what the premier was trying to solve for. I think Anita put her finger on the main point, which is to strengthen, control of the economic agenda, and giving Ravi Kahlon back to Jobs, Economic Development and Growth, or whatever its new name is clearly part of that. But that left a gap, I think, a tough one for Christine Boyle to fill, because she's now got the housing portfolio at a point at which, never mind the difficulties setting up the entire government side, which is the priority this term, to provide that new housing being built on Crown land and so on that was promised, but a real downturn that's obvious now in the market-driven sector. So I think I said on the emergency podcast, Ravi Kahlon's last act was to take $250 million and provide it to developers who are currently building so that they don't stop, because this is to help them through the development cost charges. Really troubling clouds on the horizon for housing, so a big hill for Christine Boyle to climb.
Yeah.
And it's not clear what could be done in the face of some of the these are big economic pressures that are not really amenable to a provincial solution, in my opinion. That they just can't produce housing at a saleable cost at the moment, and that's got nothing to do with regulations or anything else. A lot of those have been changed. So big questions hanging
Yeah.
over that.
My big question, one of the questions I have coming out of the shuffle is Spencer Chandra Herbert going to Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. And I feel like it was a bit of a knock-on effect that, Ravi here, Boyle
Hmm.
here, and
Hmm.
then now what do we do with these other ones? But I was just reflecting on the fact that Murray Rankin was the minister there for how many years? 4 years in the same ministry and brought serious chops to that role. Um, as a lawyer who had done decades of work in that
I think
field.
it was two, but I would agree with you. Was
Just
it?
two? Okay.
Yeah, because
Well,
Scott Fraser did it for the first term, and
oh,
then
okay. I
yeah,
just feel like the NDP's been in government forever, Jeff. It's
I know.
just,
Years.
I can sense the fatigue.
but Murray was there. I know Murray was there.
He was there for sure. Yeah, yeah,
So, Spencer's got, you know, it's an important job, right? It's not a job.
yeah.
The nature of the job too is that the minister's role really relies a bit on kind of moral suasion and influence and diplomacy and building relationships and all those things. So I'm not to say he can't do that. It's just that it's nothing in his career background as a politician seems to say why he was a natural to do that job. Because you don't get as much exposure to those issues in Vancouver West End riding. There's
Mhm.
some for sure, but we'll see. Jury's out. We'll see where that goes. Let's move along to the slow-moving disaster of the Charleigh Pollock issue and the funding of the rare disease medication that seemed like this climb down from the government was telegraphed for at least a week until they finally did capitulate on it. How big of a, you know, how much damage, political damage was done here, Anita?
Well, you say capitulate, and I would say it wasn't a capitulation as it was a real acknowledgement. And, that devil's in the interpretation of those words, but I think they made the right decision in the end. There was no question that, certainly public opinion was on the side of, funding this drug. And that letter from the US-based medical experts, changed the context, at least publicly, about what we knew about, the effectiveness of this drug. But I think it was the right decision for them in the end. I take a little bit of issue with some of the critics who, until that decision was made, was calling the minister, cruel. It wasn't so much cruelty as it was just a being stuck between a rock and a hard place. The having to rely on the expertise that you have in the civil service and the bodies you have versus the really strong public opinion. In the end, the right decision was made, and I hope that that decision will lead to good outcomes for Charleigh and her family, and a sense that this government did listen and changed course. I think that's what we take from this: is they're listening and they're changing course, and hopefully that is something that people will recognize.
Well, the alternative perspective would be after some withering criticism, particularly from Vaughan,
Mhm.
and he both also nailed Ravi Parmar the other day too on this issue, is that this is yet another example of the Premier stepping in to fix a problem. Because it was really the Premier who signaled the change, I think, last Thursday. I don't know, Jeff. I mean, that's just, I know how
Well, I
these things
think
can happen
there's a
sometimes.
double whammy here because I've thought a lot about this because it's easy now in the uh, later years to look back and say, oh, well, I would have done that differently. It's quite easy, no matter how good a batter you are, to strike out from time to time. And the thing that I think is unusual about this one was that normally the debate is should certain people be allowed to start exotic medication. In other words, a friend of mine has a very unique heart condition, not as unique as this situation, but had to apply through a physician to be recommended for a particular therapy, which if he did not receive it would arguably shorten his life. And he got it, based on his current health, his other health conditions, and so on and so forth. So hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for his medication. Not controversial, but he's starting the medication based on the evaluation. In this case, we were stopping the medication of a young person who so far had done quite well. And I think it poses that may have made it more difficult. It doesn't excuse, though, the government's long doubling down on this thing. And I do think questions need to be asked inside the public service or outside for that matter about why late arriving facts were so late arriving, like everybody else extends it. And there actually is change, various views on this. It's not uncommon for organizations to exist which are actually supported by pharmaceutical companies hoping to support the expansion of the sale of their drug. You'd be naive to think it was the case. That doesn't mean the arguments are wrong, but they're not disinterested. And so I think there were a lot of peculiarities in this one, but the government's had trouble with issues management. And will sometimes manage one way by doubling down and then be forced to retreat. And that's way worse than retreating early, or maybe sometimes just hanging on. We've seen that on a number of files now. So I
Well, this
certainly
won't
agree
be the
with.
last case either. I mean, we've seen
No.
these cases before, and I think sometimes the drug companies can be kind of egging on the families to do the PR.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that's the case here. I have no idea, but I know that other situations where it gets pretty complicated behind the scenes. I can understand why whether health public servants can have a bit of a different view of it, right? Because they probably see more than we do, obviously. Um, but
Well, I raised this in the case of
yeah,
Mitzi Dean, though, who was
yeah,
ultimately forced to resign over the handling of a child protection issue,
yeah.
over which she had no direct operational responsibility and was withheld from her for privacy reasons until the very end. These are really tough ones in politics, but the public doesn't care about that stuff.
It's
Right.
true. It's the minister that pays the price for all of that. And to your question, Mike, it seemed like the premier stepped in and issue managed on that one. Is that such a bad thing? I mean, maybe that was the right thing to do in this to turn that off and hopefully move on
He
that.
seems to do a lot of it though. So,
He's
like,
the CEO style of leader that Don Wright referred
yeah,
to. So,
yeah. Well, more to follow. Okay, moving on. The premiers are in Muskoka, joined by the Prime Minister,
Hmm.
who, Jeff, as you noted off air earlier, it's very rare, in fact, maybe even unprecedented for a Prime Minister to show up at a meeting that the premiers are hosting. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the meeting's still going on while we're talking here, so I'm not exactly sure um, what the takeaway will be for Premier Eby. Um, is there, what do you think's on his agenda to accomplish there, if anything? Because I mean, these meetings sometimes there's no real big, gotcha moment that you're working towards.
I mean, I think
Well,
he
go ahead,
signaled.
Julia. Yeah.
Yeah, he signaled, they focus on strengthening the internal trade, strengthening British Columbia's economy within the strong Canadian economy. We've seen his interaction with Doug Ford, friendly exchanges of bottles of wine from each of their regions. Hopefully this is the opportunity for those premiers to really actually drill down and address some of those interprovincial issues. But I haven't seen anything on the specifics. Jeff, I wonder if you have a sense of what he will come out of this meeting with.
Well, I think it's been hard for anybody to define precisely what these nation building projects would look like. And I don't think that the Prime Minister did the Premier Eby any favors by enthusing a bit about an oil pipeline to the northwest coast and lifting the tanker moratorium. Premier Eby was very categorical. He's not interested in lifting the tanker moratorium. For those out there who are going, oh, that's a terrible thing to say, I mean, there is definitely, in my view, going to be a second phase of the LNG Canada pipeline, which we were talking about earlier. And the Premier has supported the Kasai Sims pipeline. Both are gas. So it's not like there won't be economic activity up there. And the Northwest Transmission Line, which has also been proposed, is probably the best one that Premier Eby has for talking about the national economy and opening up critical minerals. If it was to do that, though, you need to run a lot of power up there, and it's got to come from somewhere. It'll probably come from Site C. I'm not sure what else he's got. We're going to hearing a lot about softwood lumber all of a sudden.
Well, we'll hear more, and there was an item this week that I'll note that maybe he should, when he's having a glass of wine with Premier Smith later, Alberta announced that they are pumping some more money into their Heritage Fund, which is now up to $30 billion. They've had a significant surplus this year, and they're hoping to build the Heritage Fund up to $250 billion by 2050. which is a pretty remarkable turnaround for Alberta's economy compared to where they were 5 years ago. And a lot of that's to do with commodity prices and just where they're at in the oil and gas cycle. But the one thing I thought was interesting was that the finance minister in Alberta said that, if they can build the Heritage Fund to that level, that can offset decreasing resource royalties in the future, which was interesting to see an acknowledgement from Alberta that, the gravy train of oil and gas isn't going to last forever. But it's encouraging that they've got a fund there to protect themselves. If only, if only British Columbia, we get to that point. Yeah, there once was a premier who had an LNG vision who was talking about debt-free British Columbia. Anyways,
Here we go again.
yeah,
16 long years.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not the case that we're ever going to run out of oil and gas. Let's be real. I mean, there's 200 or 300 years of gas reserves in the north. A decision to reduce gas production would have to be
But
made for other reasons.
will we need heavy oil,
No,
indefinitely
I think
if
that'll be
we've
the first
transitioned?
that'll be the first thing we stop using, in my
Yeah,
opinion. It's so difficult to work with, but the amount of oil sands is just staggering. I mean, there's
yeah. Well,
generations of reserves, unfortunately, in some respects.
yeah. Okay. Well, one more thing in the strategy suite today. We have a clipping of the week. And I actually have an actual newspaper here.
Oh, look at
Globe
that.
and
Where
Mail,
did you find that? Where did you find an actual newspaper in the wild?
the Globe and
Legacy
Mail on the
media right
weekend.
here.
Globe and Mail report on business. There's an article called "The Arms Race." First of all, the Globe and Mail. I just picked up at the grocery store because I haven't actually read an actual newspaper on paper in so long. I thought it'd be a nice Saturday thing to do. $9, $9 for the Saturday Globe and Mail.
Good
Sheesh.
BC, it's good BC pulp and paper you're supporting.
Please, listeners, send
It's
in your
just the
donations.
cost of an ice cream cone in most of
I'm
Vancouver.
going to start a GoFundMe to pay for my Saturday Globe Mail. Um, anyways, the article is from established players to startups. Ottawa's massive defense spending is set to transform the industry. Um, Basically, I won't go into too much detail on what the article says, but it's highlighting the fact that Canada's goal is defense spending is moving from 2% to as high as 5% by 2035, which means an increase from 41 billion to 150 billion. It's a massive increase in procurement. Says the article, all amounts to a major opportunity to reindustrialize and grow the manufacturing sector to the level it should be on the world stage. And that Canada's manufacturing output has dropped from 9th to 18th over the last number of years. So there's a lot in that article about C-SPAN and what it's doing on the shipbuilding front in BC. The Secretary of State for Defense Procurement is a British Columbia Liberal MP, Stephen Fuhr from Kelowna. My question is this an opportunity BC should be chasing in terms of building out our manufacturing sector and getting our elbows up for procurement in Canada? What do you think, Anita?
Uh, I would say, first of all, we'll have to see this investment in defense spending, what it comes at the expense of in the broader Canadian economy. I saw that article as well, and I noted there was a commentator who said, other countries tend to look at defense spending as an investment. We tend to call it spending. We need to reframe it and think of it as an investment. So would there be ways in the British Columbia economy that we could think of investment in some of these new technologies, in the future skills that are, that might fit some of that? I'd say, this conversation is ripe. I'd be very interested if you on the podcast could also continue this conversation, which is what is the economic, growth in this area in the province? Where could we see opportunities for some manufacturing sectors that may be struggling of late that might find some new purpose in a reframe? But it's a conversation that's critical to happen. I've also been traveling a little bit this summer. I've spent some time in Europe, and I will say that the question of defense spending is, very high in the European countries that I've spoken to people at, and the sense that we're in a very different time right now is quite real. So that conversation needs to get quite real in British Columbia as part of the Canadian discussion as well. So I'm glad you introduced this topic.
What do you think, Jeff? You ready to be like Richard McBride and build a British Columbia Navy?
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, I have very mixed feelings about this because I don't think that a successful economy is built on arms production or military exports. And usually, you take a look at General Dynamics, which makes those armored vehicles that our army uses and export all over the world. And we wound up in difficulty because Saudi Arabia bought a huge slug of them, and then we had questions about how Saudi Arabia would use them. And I think that totally support the idea of increasing our ability to defend our sovereignty and to understand what's going on our coast and so on. But I think we should look at it how we could supplement existing manufacturing activities and help them by expanding some of their work into the military sphere. So you see Bombardier building executive jets, but some of those jets are now being used for for surveillance and for satellite reception or some more military uses. But the production is fundamentally civilian. We have a great avionics and aviation sector here in BC, which builds water bombers that are used around the world. Maybe we should focus more on building out the Twin Otters that are built by the same company and use Canadian technology to strengthen that civil sector. I say the same about shipbuilding. I mean, why do we always focus on just building the biggest possible ships and not focus a little bit on building a lot of the smaller boats that we're buying from everywhere else except here to do things around the coast with, environmental protection, you name it. And it will have military application if and when the time comes. I think it's a really important area, but I don't think we should rush into it too blindly. If we can buy certain products of which we need five, for example, from a different country, maybe buy the design and manufacture here, whatever. Those are the sorts of things I think we should focus on.
Maybe if we put some guns on BC ferries, we could get some federal funding.
Well, that was one of my favorite parts of the whole ferries debate was the idea that there was some kind of intellectual property or technology available from BC ferries that would help China invade Taiwan. I don't think so. And I'm not trying to knock BC ferries, but I don't think there's an international security issue there. Sorry, I just don't believe it.
Okay, well, on that note, we've covered a lot of territory. Why don't we go get a drink in the minibar?
Oh
Geoff?
man. Well, I've said some negative things on this podcast about Brad West,
You have?
and I want to say a positive thing today. I thought his line about, and it was critical of the government about joining a party of Tommy Douglas because you wanted to, it was a party of healthcare and Medicare, going from a Tommy Douglas approach to a GoFundMe approach was a devastating blow in that whole debate about the young girl who needed the medicine. So I'm going to raise a glass to Brad West because I think he put into one small sentence what a lot of people were very worried about with that whole debate. So here's to you, Brad West.
Can I raise a secondary glass on
Hold on, Anita. I just have to make a calculation here. Okay, we're now at 47 Glenn Clark references to 35 Brad West references on the show. So, Brad, you still got a bit of work to do, but
let
still trailing Glenn.
Let the record show that I hardly ever mention either of them. So,
well, Brad better pick up his
I was
socks.
just going to pile on. I was going to add another half reference to Geoff's tally there, which is that the second part of his zinger of a quote was about the elected leadership is supposed to be about humanizing the bureaucracy or something along those lines. And I also thought that gave a lot of pause for reflection around what it is that governments are elected to do and how we do it. So, thanks to Brad for really offering up those thoughts.
Okay, what do you got to bring to the
Okay,
bar?
well, mine's a little lighter, and I want to raise a glass to everyone who's involved in putting on summer music festivals in British Columbia and summer festivals in general. I mean, you started off chatting about the Vancouver Folk Music Festival, which took place this weekend. Again, that is an institution in this part of the province and has survived, as Geoff said. But it's also a really critical place for people to gather, get together, listen to music. It's part of our a tribe, I would say, of folks who come for music and some politics. And but so many other festivals are that way. Jess Ketchum last week talked about the Anaheim Lake Stampede and how that's the official start to summer, and that's the important step on the camp, on the trail of conversations in communities where people get together. So I just really want to raise a glass to everyone who puts on a summer festival. It's a lot of work. It's in difficult times. Funding is not as available this year as it has been in previous years, and I know there's been a lot about that. So to every level of government that invests in a festival, I raise extra glasses to you, because I think festivals keep us united and together and having a bit of fun in the province over the summertime, which is what we need, because, we slog it out throughout the rest of the year, but the festivals are where we recreate and celebrate and get together and talk. So my hat's
All
off
right.
to them.
Good one.
Here.
Well, I'm going to take a shot at the longest ballot committee, which I think there are about 90 candidates on the ballot in Drumheller, where Pierre Poilievre's running in the by-election. And they did this in previous by-elections. I think they did in Poilievre's riding during the federal election, maybe too. I'm not sure. But it's an abuse. I think we should work to prevent it in British Columbia for provincially. I would strongly encourage a private member's bill in this regard, which I think could take care of the issue. Poilievre had some recommendations. They put out a statement in the last day or so, which I thought were pretty reasonable, which is like, you can only be official agent to one candidate, instead of multiple candidates. And there should be a higher threshold for getting on the ballot. I think it should still be, we shouldn't be too restrictive in case there's last minute candidates who come along. You don't want to lose a good candidate if they just can't get 100 signatures in 12 hours or whatever, because I've had to do that in the past, get candidates in at the last minute. But for something that's so obviously an abuse that doesn't serve the public good, I would argue, for candidates who don't even show up to the riding, to campaign, like, give me a break. So anyways, take a shot at them.
Okay.
Anyways, there you go. Thank you, Ambassador Ian McKay and Anita Zaenker, for checking into the hotel today. Thank you, Anita.
Pleasure.
And hope you had a good time. Hope you
I
found
loved
the hospitality to your liking.
delicious lemon water in the lobby. Thanks so much.
Oh, perfect. We're making, yeah. Cue the lemonade joke there. And thank you to our presenting sponsor TELUS, and to Fortis BC. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.